Hey everyone, this is Chris with Hi-Lux Optics.
And this is Scott. And we're back for another weekly Q&A, and I realize I missed the last couple weeks and haven't done them on Tuesday because we've been at the range too often, which is a good problem to have. So we have today a slightly shorter slate of questions to go through, mostly because we're playing catch-up here, and we picked only the most interesting. We'll start with an easy one. This was a question about the long scope, the scope that's about 3 feet long. Can it be mounted on a Marlin 336?
And short answer is unfortunately not. The long scope, so the Malcolm 6X or the Gen 2 long scopes, they require a minimum barrel length of 26 inches. So I think all the 336s, maybe the longest one had a barrel length of 24. Not 100% sure on that.
The usual length is about 20 inches.
About 20 inches. So unfortunately, you can't mount a long scope on that. But most of the 336s do have the holes on top of the receiver that are already pre-drilled. So you should be able to use those existing holes and the rear sight dovetail to mount one of our short scopes. We have a mounting kit for the 1894 and 95 Marlins, and it'll actually line up with the 336s as well.
But do make sure that yours has those holes drilled on top. Like he mentioned, not all of them do or did. So, but it's an easy thing. You look at it, they're either there or they're not there. So the next one, a little bit longer here. Hello, are any of the long eye relief scopes mounted in scout position could be used for higher magnification or long range, as well as, say, 500 plus yards? He was talking about the M1A rifle in particular, but let's just drill in on the important topic here. LER scopes. Can you actually use them past 500 yards?
Well, we have actually. It really depends on how you're going to be using the scope. So if you're going to be dialing your elevation, I'd say the scope itself has internal travel of about 60 minutes, which is 30 from each side. If you're using a 20-minute rail, you should be able to maybe dial out to 800 yards if you're shooting 308. Now, with that being said, the amount of magnification, it's really personal. A lot of people say you need one extra power for every 100 yards. So, for example, 7 power, you might be able to shoot 700 yards. So, but we've taken actually 6 power out to over 1,000 yards. So it really depends on your personal preference and your style of shooting. If you're really good at bracketing or using reference points and doing Kentucky windage, I think you can get away with less magnification.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it's really, if you want to get the center of the crosshairs on the center of the target, you may be constrained by just how much you can dial. If you're willing to hold off a little bit and you don't want to make the target totally fill up your field of view, then yeah, you could definitely use this out past 500. I don't know if I'd use it at a mile, though. That might be a little tough.
Yeah, you'd be pushing it there.
That being said, we have taken 308 out to just shy of a mile. And I think at that time I was using 14 power magnification. I kind of want to try it. Can the M1A be pushed to a mile?
Probably.
Find out more later. All right, third question. This one's a funny little mistranslation. 21 foot-pounds for a rail, 50. You're going to strip. I'm going to say this guy is indeed correct. 21 foot-pounds for a rail would be insane. In the videos where we're talking about how to fasten rings onto a rail or scope into rings, we're always talking in units of inch pounds because we are just not that strong. 50 foot-pounds would
compress the tube.
Yeah.
Or it might even compress the rail.
I think it would.
That's a lot of force.
Goodness.
But as a general point of reference for all our scopes, on the scope rings, we recommend no more than 15 inch-pounds of torque. That's usually enough to keep them in place, and you don't need to be clamping down so hard that you're going to be constricting the tube.
As for the rail, though, we've got, what's the name of that wrench, that automated wrench?
It's the Wheeler torque wrench. It's not super precise, but it does a decent job.
That's 65 pounds?
For 65 inch-pounds for
yeah.
Like the half-inch nuts. That's what we recommend. If we're using just like a Torx or T25 torque screw, you could probably get away with just 35, 40 inch-pounds.
And that, of course, does use rails that are made of metal. I know there are rails out there nowadays that are composite. I don't know the compressive strength of a composite rail. It would probably be less than metal, but I can't really guarantee that because I don't have any to try it with. Now I need to buy more stuff. Speaking of, today the air rifle arrived and I've been playing with it, and so I just need to buy more stuff now. Stay tuned for that as well. Now, the fourth question, this is a little more open-ended. It's actually not a specific question. It's a bunch that are all going to be grouped together. We want to talk about the typical kinds of damage and how to avoid that damage on modern internal adjusting scopes. I'll start with the easy one. When you're turning the dials and you hit a limit, let's say you max out on the elevation, please don't use a wrench to force it to move farther. Those stops are there for a reason. Usually the erector unit inside the scope is hitting the inner wall. And if you try to crank it, well, usually the erector unit is not going to bust through the wall. There's too much strength there. The first point of failure is going to be the turret itself. At that point, it will start spinning again, but it won't do anything. And it will be broken.
Yeah, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Don't put a wrench to your turrets unless it's like a tool that is needed, unless you're turning a screw or something like that. But let's say if it's an adjustment and you can't turn it anymore, don't put pliers to it and turn it. Another thing is, like what we mentioned earlier about the scope rings, make sure your torque settings on your scope rings are torqued to the correct setting. If the screws on the scope rings are too tight, that can actually constrict the tube slightly and actually grip onto the erector unit. And there's slots on the erector unit where the lenses move when you're turning the magnification if it's a variable power scope. And if you can imagine, if the scope rings are squeezing down onto that erector unit, there's no way for it to turn. And if you force the ring to turn, you're going to cause some lenses to go loose.
Which actually sort of ties into another weird way that scopes sometimes get stuck up. And we covered this in a video a very long time ago. If you have your adjustments maxed out, let's say the windage is pushed all the way to one side, and you try to turn your magnification, there's a chance that you're going to be dragging that erector unit along the inside of the scope tube, and that will just sort of catch it. Sometimes it'll stop it completely and you won't be able to adjust magnification. Sometimes you'll just sort of be dragging and rubbing it, and metal rubbing on metal isn't always the best thing. So in moments like that, you'll definitely feel the magnification suddenly, for reasons unknown, becomes very difficult to turn. And that means if you're pushed to the extreme on one of your adjustments, something in there is contacting and you got to back off a little bit.
No, go ahead. That's a good point. And I was just going to add, a general first step of troubleshooting that we always do here is just to reset everything to mechanical or optical center. And the way to do that generally is just turn the turrets all the way down clockwise and count back. Well, you have to know the adjustment range and count back half the number of clicks to get back to center. And you can break up those amount of clicks. So for example, if you're shooting the LER scope, you have 60 minutes of travel. You dialed both elevation and windage all the way down, and then you count back 30 minutes or 120 clicks. And you would do that 20 clicks on elevation, 20 clicks on windage, and so forth until you've made 120 on both. That should put you back into center and hopefully free up the magnification ring or give you the maximum amount of adjustment for you to get back and sighted in.
Now, one thing that I've seen people ask about following that exact maneuver is, once it's been reset to center and things aren't contacting anymore, won't adjusting just bring it right back to where it was stuck at before? And yes, it would. But now you're in a position where the scope works and you know that you hit a limit either on elevation or windage. So either in some rifles and some setups, for example, the M1A, where the LER is often mounted, our particular mounting bracket has external windage built into the rear. So you could scoot it around and get it so that the scope is now actually centered in line with the bore, and you're not going to be hitting the wall just trying to get on target at 100 yards. Another example would be if you're going out super long distance, you've maxed out your elevation. Well, now you know you might need an angled rail. That'll free up some adjustment room. You'll no longer be hitting inside.
Yeah, and sometimes it could be an indication that maybe the rail is not drilled or aligned properly. You have to realize the scopes are so fine. The adjustment is so fine that even half a degree will throw off. Half a degree is actually going to throw it off by 30 minutes. So everything has to be perfectly aligned. So maybe check the mounts too if you're running out of adjustments. Let's see, what else? When you're cleaning your scope, cleaning your rifle, make sure you put on, if you have lens covers, put on the lens covers when you're spraying solvent. Those can damage the coatings on the lenses. Maybe when you're pushing your patches through your gun, there could be some fine mist or spray. You don't want that oil getting on the lenses, so just make sure you cover up the lenses. The oils also, or those solvents could be particularly nasty to the O-rings, so make sure you just keep it all covered up and protected.
I've actually used saran wrap and a rubber band. Just saran wrap over the entire thing, rubber band around where your rings are, totally covered. Nothing's going to drip on it, spray on it. And then afterwards, it's easy to just rip it off and throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are really some of the most common ways scopes are broken.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe if you travel, we just got back from Perry a couple months ago, and one of the shooters actually, they're from Puerto Rico, and they're traveling over, and I guess the TSA, they mishandled their gun, rattled it around, and when he took out his rifle from the box, I guess I don't know, there was some damage to his scope, and when you're traveling with firearms, make sure you use either pre-cut foam in a Pelican case, or at least use some kind of foam padding so that when it gets shaken around, nothing's rattling around inside. That could definitely do some damage.
The other good thing is if your rings are attached to your scope and your rail is attached to your rifle in a way where you're not going to be taking them off, you can generally remove the scope and rings from the rail, set it aside, ship it separately, pack it separately, and when you reattach it to the rifle, you might not be exactly where you were, but you're going to be darn close.
Mm-hmm.
And at CMP, there's that little side range where you can get zeroed in and test things out. You can pretty easily just move the few clicks over to get back in your zero. The rifle's going to shoot the same way it had before you shipped it. Everything should work out.
Yeah, but I guess on the other side, there's guys who are maybe superstitious. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, don't touch it. So, I mean, if anything, pack your case so nothing rattles. But yeah, you could take it off and get resighted and get back to your original settings.
I will say I'm not going to do that for anything that is not a Picatinny rail. So Picatinny rail is just about the only situation where I'll do it. Our old scopes that use the dovetails and the blocks and all that, I'm superstitious about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take anything off. But I have slid a scope entirely out of the rings and left the rings on the rifle. I don't know. I'm a bit of a hypocrite there. Just the easiest solution is the one I'll go with. Anyway,
I'm trying to think of anything else that has come in.
I mean, most problems with scopes come down to really one of two areas. Either it was hit by something it should not have hit, whether it's the ground from dropping or in some cases a hammer. Anyway, something that's hitting it that shouldn't be hitting it, and that can break something. Kind of like hitting a mug with a hammer. It's not going to be good to the mug. The other thing that happens is people just go too hard. So if the turret locks up and you try to turn it too hard, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If the rings are on the scope and you want to really lock them in and you just try to tighten the rings too hard, that could cause a problem. So hits and hardness, really what it comes down to, aside from extreme inclement weather. But that doesn't affect every scope the same.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And and if you're shooting a Malcolm scope in a wet environment, make sure you immediately dry it off before you put it into your gun safe. That could cause all kinds of nasty problems for your scope and your rifle barrels and other guns inside the safe. So make sure, best case would be let it fully air dry and then apply some oil on the outside before you put it back in.
Yeah, the Unerdal style scopes of the 8 power and the 20 power, and actually our recent versions of the 6 power where you can move the reticle and change the reticle out, those by their very nature cannot be air sealed. So we'll pump them with nitrogen here just to keep them nice and tidy, but once you start using them, if you take the eyepiece off, if you move the reticle, if you adjust the parallax, all those are air gaps where air can get in. Mm-hmm. So you do have to lend a little extra care and concern to those type of scopes, but that comes with the time period.
Yep, and I think that just about does it for all the most common cases that we've seen.
So if y'all have any other interesting stories of how scopes are broken and you're not really sure what happened there, please send them in, give us a call. I'm always curious to hear how things fail so we can make them a little bit better. And that about does it for this week's Q&A. Y'all take it easy out there. Enjoy whatever it is you're shooting. And as the other YouTubers say, like, subscribe, follow, comment. Are there any others?
I think that's it.
That's it. All right. Y'all take it easy out there.
See you next time.